Life before dinosaurs. The age of giant insects. Full documentary. Long before the age of dinosaurs, the skies were ruled by creatures of unimaginable size, their wings casting shadows over a world unlike any we know today. This was the age of giant insects, an era when colossal dragonflies, towering millipedes, and monstrous beetles dominated the earth. Oxygen-rich air fueled their growth, and lush, endless forests offered shelter and sustenance. But as these giants flourished, the world began to shift. Join us on a journey into a forgotten epoch, where the reign of giants carved the blueprint for life on Earth as we know it. The breath of a new world. When the seas began to draw back from the continents, and the continents themselves rose like vast, dripping shoulders from the oceanic depths, the Earth exhaled for the first time. The air, once thin and inhospitable, started to thicken with a presence that could nourish breath. Within this new atmosphere, faint traces of oxygen, once a mere whisper in the geological record, grew stronger, spreading across landscapes that had never known wind. The world was entering a quiet revolution, one measured not in eruptions or cataclysms, but in the invisible chemistry of air. In the late Silurian and early Devonian periods, roughly 420 million years ago, oxygen concentrations in Earth's atmosphere rose from less than 10% to nearly 15%. A transformation brought about by a new kind of organism, land plants. Primitive mosses and liverworts clung to damp shorelines, sending root-like filaments into nutrient-poor soils and releasing oxygen as a byproduct of photosynthesis. They were fragile, low, and silent, yet they altered the course of planetary evolution. Fossil spores preserved in rocks from this age reveal microscopic evidence of these pioneers' tiny carbonized capsules, proof that photosynthesis had begun to reshape the air itself. The landscape they created was strange and almost otherworldly. Imagine plains carpeted not with grasses but with waist-high mats of green, where rivers split and wandered across muddy deltas. The air shimmered with moisture, and the ground, once barren, became a living crust. Cyanobacteria and early fungi worked together in symbiotic partnerships, breaking down minerals and enriching the soil with nutrients. Geochemical data from ancient sediments show rising concentrations of iron oxides and sulfates, a signal of expanding oxygen influence. Life was no longer confined to water. It had taken its first uncertain steps upon the land. The first true colonizers of these nascent continents were not plants alone. Among the mosses and decaying organic matter, small arthropods began to appear, creatures with jointed legs and armored bodies, their exoskeletons leaving faint impressions in the soft mud. The oldest known of these terrestrial invaders includes millipede-like organisms from the Scottish Rhynie chert, preserved in exquisite detail within silica. Their spiraled breathing tubes, or tracheae, suggest an early adaptation to air. These were not yet the giants that would one day dominate the Carboniferous, but they carried within them the blueprint of greatness, the ability to extract oxygen from the sky. By 410 million years ago, the balance between land and air had shifted irreversibly. Vast networks of root-stabilized soils, slowing erosion and allowing organic matter to accumulate. This natural engineering triggered a feedback loop that increased atmospheric oxygen even further. Geochemical modeling of Devonian sediments reveals that oxygen levels may have reached up to 18%, still below modern levels, but high enough to support larger and more complex terrestrial organisms. The stage was being set for an evolutionary experiment that would lead, ultimately, to the birth of giants. The transformation was not merely biological, it was planetary. The Earth's crust itself responded to the new green mantle that wrapped its surface. The presence of rooted plants, accelerated weathering of silicate rocks, drawing down carbon dioxide and cooling the global climate. Glacial deposits in Devonian strata from South America and Africa record the first hints of polar ice in tens of millions of years. As the air cooled, oxygen remained abundant, and new ecological niches opened across the continents. Insects, still primitive, wingless, and minute, emerged from aquatic ancestors and began to explore the margins of this transformed world. The evidence for these early terrestrial insects comes not from skeletons but from ghostly imprints in ancient stone. In Rheni, in Gilboa, and in fragments of Devonian shale from Germany, paleontologists have uncovered the delicate remains of creatures resembling silverfish, their bodies segmented and their antennae long and probing. These fossils reveal mouthparts designed for scraping and chewing, suggesting a diet of decaying vegetation or fungal material. Oxygen, once toxic to early anaerobic life, had become the fuel for their existence. Their respiratory systems, networks of fine tubes that carried air directly into the tissues, were astonishingly efficient in a world newly rich with breathable gas. It was not yet an age of predators or power, but an age of persistence and adaptation. The first terrestrial ecosystems were fragile, prone to collapse when drought struck or rivers changed course. Fossil evidence shows layers of ash and flood deposits interrupting the continuity of these early soils, suggesting that every generation of pioneers lived under the constant threat of obliteration. Yet with each renewal, life returned stronger, more diverse, and better suited to its environment. The earliest ecosystems became laboratories of resilience, testing the boundaries of what breathing, crawling, and feeding on land could mean. The link between atmosphere and evolution deepened as the Devonian progressed. Oxygen continued to accumulate, fed by the expanding forests of early vascular plants, such as Cooksonia and Zosterophyllum, whose branching stems reached several tens of centimeters high. These plants produced lignin, a tough compound that allowed them to grow upright but resisted decay. As lignin-rich material built up in layers, it locked away carbon, driving oxygen concentrations even higher. This chemical imbalance would later peak in the Carboniferous, when oxygen levels soared to over 30%, creating the very conditions that would allow insects to grow to sizes unimaginable today. The interplay between land and air produced unexpected consequences. Higher oxygen levels increased the risk of fire, and charred plant fossils from Devonian deposits in Wales and Australia reveal that wildfires already flickered across the continents. Lightning storms, once harmless, could now ignite forests, sending plumes of ash into the atmosphere and recycling nutrients into the soil. These fires, paradoxically, helped stabilize oxygen levels by periodically culling vegetation and controlling biomass. The cycle of growth, combustion, and renewal would become one of the planet's most enduring feedback systems, a balance between breath and flame that continues to shape life's chemistry. As the Devonian drew toward its close, the outlines of future worlds began to appear. The continents of Gondwana and Euramerica drifted closer, forming vast interior plains where rivers meandered beneath humid skies. The air was no longer alien. It carried the scent of organic decay, the pulse of respiration, the mingled breath of plants, and the first land dwellers. Within this evolving atmosphere, evolution's possibilities expanded with every increase in oxygen pressure. The stage was set for life to scale new dimensions, height, distance, and eventually the freedom of flight. For in this changing air lay potential waiting to unfold. The creatures that had once crawled through tidal shallows now stood upon solid ground, and some would soon learn to leave it altogether. The chemistry of the sky had opened a doorway to movement and power, and through it would pass the first great flyers, the ancestors of the giants, whose wings would one day cast shadows over forests of stone and fern. The earth was breathing deeply now, and with every breath it was preparing for the ascent to come. Wings of the Carboniferous. The earth's deep breath had changed the air itself. Now, in the thick humidity of the Carboniferous, that breath lingered rich with oxygen, dense as mist. Across the swamps, colossal ferns rose like living cathedrals, their fronds dripping with water and light. What had once been potential in the stillness of the previous age now moved through the air as power. From this charged atmosphere, the first great flyers would rise, their wings cutting through the haze of a world newly alive with motion. It was during the Carboniferous, around 350 million years ago, that the first true flyers emerged from the primordial swamps. Insects, some already large in body, now had the means to conquer new dimensions. The air, thick with oxygen, levels reaching as high as 35%, provided the perfect backdrop for insect flight to evolve. It was an era unlike any before, one where the very chemistry of the planet allowed life to grow to unprecedented scales. Fossil evidence from sites like Coventry, France, and Kansas, USA, shows that insects such as Meganeura, with wingspans of nearly 70 centimeters, soared through the canopy, their sheer size and agility startling to imagine. The simple act of flying, once confined to birds and bats millennia later, was born in a world dominated by these ancient invertebrates. The wings of these early giants tell a story of evolution at full throttle. Anatomical studies of Meganeura reveal an intricate structure with a wing morphology adapted for both power and maneuverability. These dragonfly-like insects relied on a sophisticated arrangement of muscles that worked in harmony with their tracheal breathing systems, optimizing the intake of the abundant oxygen around them. The spiraling, cross-vascular system of their wings suggests a flight mechanism driven not only by sheer size, but by an efficiency unmatched by modern insects. The fossilized wings, preserved with such fine detail, provide a glimpse into a time when biology had unlocked the keys to aerial dominance, enabling insects to glide above a world teeming with ferns, cycads, and early amphibians. In this high-oxygen world, flight became more than just a means of escape. It was the weapon of the Carboniferous aerial hunters. With their immense size and sharp mandibles, insects like Meganeura were not just passive creatures, they were predators in their own right, patrolling the dense plant life beneath the soaring trees. Evidence suggests these giants may have preyed upon smaller insects and even early amphibians that ventured too close to the water's edge. Their keen, compound eyes, which could detect even the slightest movement beneath them, made them formidable hunters in the canopy's dark underbrush. As they darted through the thick air, they controlled their territory with precision, their size giving them an unrivaled dominance in the air. The evolutionary leap of flight was not limited to just one species. Other insects of the era, such as Meganeuropsis, another giant dragonfly relative, shared this newfound aerial prowess. With wingspans stretching over a meter, these creatures pushed the boundaries of what was possible for insect flight. Fossils of Meganeuropsis show features that would support their agile hunting behavior, including an extended thorax for muscle attachment and a robust flight apparatus that could withstand the strain of long-distance travel across the swampland. As these insects flourished, their massive size reshaped the dynamics of the Carboniferous ecosystem. No longer confined to the soil, life had learned to conquer the skies. The forests of this time, lush with ferns and primitive trees, were not just static landscapes. They were living, breathing organisms, pulsing with life and conflict. As the insects took to the air, the flora below responded in kind. The towering lycopsid trees and seed ferns, which could grow over 30 meters tall, released clouds of spores that mingled with the humid air. This constant biological activity created a feedback loop that encouraged growth, both in the plant kingdom and among the giant insect population. The Carboniferous forest was alive with movement and interaction, as insects adapted not only to survive, but to thrive in the ever-expanding vertical world. Fossils from this period show a dense ecosystem, one where creatures of all sizes battled for space and resources. Insects, with their newfound ability to fly, had access to resources that were once beyond their reach, from the upper canopy's rich foliage to the insects and small vertebrates that had previously been shielded by the dense vegetation. This aerial advantage shifted the balance of the ecosystem, with predators of all kinds now contending for supremacy in this high-oxygen environment. The sheer number of species thriving in the Carboniferous forests, from the smallest winged scavengers to the largest aerial predators, made this a golden age of insect life. Yet, for all their dominance in the air, the giant insects' reign was far from guaranteed. Their success was inextricably tied to the stability of the oxygen-rich atmosphere. High oxygen levels, while facilitating their large size and flight abilities, also came with their own risks. For one, the increased levels of oxygen made the atmosphere more volatile. Early plants, rich in cellulose, would begin to decay, potentially fueling fires. This risk of combustion loomed over the towering forests, and evidence from fossilized charcoal found in Carboniferous deposits suggests that fires were indeed a common occurrence. While these fires cleared land and recycled nutrients, they also created a harsh new reality for the giants of the sky. Even the smallest shift in climate, or a slight drop in oxygen levels, could drastically alter the trajectory of their dominance. Despite these dangers, the age of giant insects continued to thrive. The forests that supported them were resilient, evolving along with their aerial rulers. New plant species emerged, and with them, new opportunities for the aerial predators to exploit. Fossilized coprolites, ancient insect droppings, reveal a diet rich in plant matter, signaling the complex interactions between herbivorous insects and the dense, oxygen-saturated vegetation. As the ferns grew taller and thicker, so did the insects, each species adapting to fit the ever-expanding vertical complexity of the world around them. In the moist air, amid the flickering shadows of giant trees, the stage was set for a continued dominance of flight. But every world, no matter how finely balanced, is subject to change. The age of giant insects, with its soaring titans and endless green horizons, was never destined to last. The same atmosphere that once lifted them toward the heavens would soon begin to betray them, shifting in ways no creature could foresee. Oxygen would falter, climates would turn, and the canopy that had sung with the hum of wings would start to fall silent. Beneath those vast ferns, the air that had once given life now whispered of limits, and the reign of the sky giants began to tremble, the forest of giants. Below the vast canopy where wings once ruled, the world darkens into green. The air is thick with moisture, and the sunlight that once glimmered upon open swamps now filters through leaves the size of sails. Every droplet of mist carries the scent of resin and decay. Here, beneath towering ferns and colossal club mosses, life thrives in a labyrinth of shade and silence. The same atmosphere that allowed giants to soar above now feeds a realm of towering plants and armored crawlers. The earth has become a vast greenhouse, and within it, evolution begins to weave its most intricate designs. Mist clings to trunks older than memory. The trees of this world are not like those we know today. Their bark is scaled, their branches sparse, their trunks hollow with the passage of time. Lepidodendron and Sigillaria rise 40 meters high, their roots spreading outward like skeletal fans. Calamites, the ancient horsetails, stand in clusters along swampy margins, while beneath them spread carpets of mosses and lycophytes. Fossil seams of coal tell the story of their abundance, layer upon layer of compressed vegetation that once captured sunlight and turned it into the fuel of life. Every trunk, every fallen log, becomes a universe of its own, alive with the motion of insects and arthropods that crawl, burrow, and hunt in the eternal twilight. Every inch of bark carries its own colony. Millipedes the length of a man coil beneath decaying leaves, their segments glistening in the dim light. Giant scorpions stalk the marshes, their pincers poised above the water's surface. And then there is Arthropleura, the colossal millipede whose body could span 2 meters, sliding silently between the roots. The forest floor quivers with its passage, leaving behind tracks that will one day fossilize into dark impressions, echoes of motion in a world too dense for open air. These creatures breathe the same oxygen-rich atmosphere that sustains the trees, their size and stamina made possible by a chemistry far beyond anything seen before or since. Roots spread through the mire like veins feeding a sleeping heart. The swamps are alive not only above ground, but within layers of peat forming beneath still water, where decay moves slowly and carbon builds endlessly. Over millions of years, this slow burial of organic matter would create the coal seams that define the Carboniferous name. But in this moment, it is a world still vibrant with life. Giant dragonflies drift through the shadows, their wings catching stray shafts of light, while beetles and early roaches scuttle through the litter, carving out ecological roles that will persist for hundreds of millions of years. The forest hums, its rhythm both ancient and precise. Within fossilized coal seams lies evidence of forests dense with life and heavy with breath. In deposits across Europe and North America, paleobotanists uncover delicate impressions of leaves, spores, and insect wings preserved in carbonized layers. Each fossil is a fragment of a world that once breathed in perfect synchrony. Oxygen levels reach nearly 35%, creating conditions that allowed insects to grow to astonishing sizes. Even the air itself burned more easily. Lightning strikes would ignite vast fires that swept through the canopies, occasionally resetting the balance of life. Yet from every ashbed, new shoots would rise, feeding on decay, ensuring that the cycle of growth never ceased. Every ecosystem within these forests was an experiment in coexistence. The towering plants, with their shallow roots and rapid growth, dominated the canopy but left little sunlight for what lay beneath. Smaller ferns and mosses clung to the bases of trees, while arthropods adapted to the shadows, some becoming scavengers, others predators of the damp dark. The variety of life was astonishing, and yet it depended on the stability of the same oxygen-heavy air that now filled every breath. In this equilibrium, growth and decay existed in delicate harmony, bound by the chemistry of the sky and the stillness of the earth. Nothing in this forest was without intent. Every sound carried a purpose. The flutter of wings marked both hunter and prey. The hiss of shifting vegetation betrayed the motion of unseen creatures, each navigating the tangled web of roots and stems. The plants themselves were silent architects of this world. Through photosynthesis, they drew down carbon dioxide, releasing torrents of oxygen that thickened the atmosphere. Insects and trees thus became partners in evolution, one feeding the other in an endless exchange. The forests grew higher, the insects larger, each feeding the other's ambition toward excess. It was a partnership that bordered on perfection. For all its beauty, even paradise bears its burden. The very abundance that sustained these colossal ecosystems also made them fragile. The immense production of organic material buried more and more carbon underground, gradually altering the climate. As the land masses drifted and seas retreated, the air's balance began to shift, the temperature fluctuating in unpredictable patterns. For the moment, life continued undisturbed, unaware that its golden age carried within it the quiet mechanism of decline. The Forest of Giants was not merely a place of life, but also the stage for its eventual reckoning. Beneath the abundance, competition was already shaping new destinies. The first amphibians crept along the marshes, seeking refuge from larger predators, while smaller arthropods adapted to exploit every possible niche. The canopy, once secure, became a contested space of climbing vines, sprawling roots, and shadowed territories. Each inch of the forest became a frontier. What had begun as harmony was now a quiet struggle for survival, a contest of growth, light, and endurance in a world that seemed endless but was already changing. The age of towering trees and colossal insects had reached its peak, suspended in the stillness before transformation. The atmosphere that had given life to giants would soon begin to waver, the climate to dry, and the once unbroken forests to fragment into islands of green. The delicate exchange between air and earth, between plant and insect, began to falter, and deep within the soil that had once nourished the forests of giants, the first signs of change were stirring, silent, invisible, inevitable, the life of giants. Amid the waning green of the carboniferous forests, the giants still thrived, each movement a testament to adaptation refined by eons. Beneath the towering club mosses and ferns, their lives unfolded with a rhythm of hunger, growth, and survival, written into every joint and wing. The air, dense with oxygen and the scent of decay, carried the whispers of a world in transition where size was not just strength, but strategy. Within this ancient ecosystem, Meganeura, the colossal dragonfly, ruled the skies as both hunter and monarch. Fossils from Monceau-les-Mines reveal wings nearly 70 centimeters across, their venation patterns magnified to impossible scale. Its compound eyes, each composed of tens of thousands of facets, gave it unmatched aerial precision. Prey rarely stood a chance. Smaller insects, primitive mayflies, and even juvenile amphibians were plucked from the air in mid-flight. In its flight mechanics, scientists see evidence of powerful thoracic muscles anchored to a lightweight exoskeleton, a design perfected by atmospheric generosity. Meganeura was both apex predator and evolutionary marvel, its vast wings allowing it to glide effortlessly between towering ferns, preying upon whatever small creature dared cross its path. But for every aerial sovereign, there was a creature of the soil, slower, heavier, yet no less remarkable. Arthropleura, the immense millipede, traced wide paths through the underbrush, feeding on the detritus of the forest. Fossil trackways in Scotland and Nova Scotia preserve the memory of its movement, parallel rows of impressions left in the soft mud, each marking a slow march through fallen fronds and decaying bark. It lived in a world with few vertebrate predators capable of threatening it. Its armour of interlocking plates was both shield and identity. Inside, its body's tracheal system thrived in the high oxygen atmosphere, a natural experiment in gigantism that would never again be repeated on such a scale. Its movements, slow and deliberate, carved out ecological niches in the dark undergrowth, feeding on what the towering trees shed. It needed vast amounts of oxygen to fuel its enormous body, and the dense atmosphere provided it with just that. In the shaded wetlands, the balance shifted again. Gigantic scorpions and early eurypterids, the sea scorpions haunted the shallows, bridging two worlds. Fossilized stingers and pincers suggest powerful muscles designed for both predation and defense, their armor glistening in the moist air. Some species, such as Pulmonoscorpius kirktonensis, evolved primitive book lungs, marking an evolutionary step toward independence from the water. Their survival hinged on adaptability, the ability to hunt both aquatic and terrestrial prey in a world still learning to breathe. The diversity of arthropods in these swamps reveals a world where niches were not just filled, but expanded upon each species, adapting its hunting methods, feeding habits, and reproductive strategies to the specific demands of its environment. Here, the interdependence between water and land created an ecosystem unlike any before. Fossilized microstructures offer glimpses into their lives, revealing not just what they ate, but how they interacted with their environment. Microscopic tooth marks on plant material suggest herbivorous arthropods actively sought out and consumed soft tissues of ferns and horsetails, which were far more nutrient-rich than the woody trunks that stood like sentinels over the swamp. The immense size of these creatures allowed them to become the ultimate consumers of plant matter, recycling nutrients back into the ecosystem. In contrast, predatory arthropods, like Meganeura, would have exerted a controlling force over population densities, ensuring that no single species dominated for too long. But it wasn't only size that enabled survival. Strategy played a key role in the life cycles of these creatures. Reproduction in the Carboniferous giants was intrinsically tied to the stability of their environment. Eggs were laid in sheltered, humid microhabitats, where moisture and temperature were stable conditions, crucial for the development of offspring. Many species likely deposited their eggs in rotting wood or beneath the water's surface, where young larvae could feed on the decomposing organic material until they reached maturity. This reliance on stable conditions meant that any environmental shift, a decrease in humidity, a slight temperature change, or a sudden shift in oxygen levels could threaten their survival. The high levels of atmospheric oxygen that fueled their growth also made them vulnerable to the slow but inevitable decline of this perfect balance. The oxygen-rich atmosphere fueled their growth, with concentrations around 35%, nearly 50% higher than today. This surplus of oxygen enabled arthropods to grow to enormous sizes, as the air provided them with a more efficient means of respiration. Oxygen diffusion, delivered by the intricate tracheal systems of these creatures, could support the energy demands of their massive bodies. As the oxygen content of the atmosphere gradually began to decline in the late Carboniferous, the metabolic demands of these giants would have become harder to meet. Without sufficient oxygen, their colossal bodies would struggle to fuel their energy-intensive lifestyles, leading to a slow but inevitable contraction of their world. Fossilized wings, delicate and intricate, testify to the magnificence of their flight. Meganeura's wings were not merely ornamental, but essential to its predatory success. The aerodynamic efficiency of their design, coupled with the high oxygen concentration, allowed for bursts of speed that were unmatched by anything on Earth before or since. The mechanics of flight were far more complex than previously imagined. The wings themselves were equipped with specialized vanes, strengthening the membrane and enhancing their aerodynamic properties. Such adaptations made them formidable predators, but also subjects of relentless evolutionary pressure, as every wing beat carried with it the weight of survival. In contrast, the Arthropleura, grounded in the shadows, was a silent giant. The combination of its sheer size and its feeding habits meant that it played a crucial role in the forest's ecosystem. By feeding on dead plant matter, it facilitates nutrient cycling in the soil. However, its large size also created ecological tension. The more oxygen-dependent it became, the more it tied its existence to the very air it breathed, an air that was starting to change. The decline of oxygen triggered an adaptive challenge. Would these giants evolve or succumb to fate? The giants that once soared in the sky and crawled through the underbrush now faced a world that could no longer sustain their colossal forms. Forests, once lush and expansive, would fragment and dry, breaking apart the continuous network of nutrients and habitats that had fostered such growth. The great giants of the Carboniferous, finely tuned to their environment, now stood at extinction's precipice, not weak, but adapted to a world changing too rapidly. In this fragile moment, the legacy of the Carboniferous giants remains. Fossilized wings, preserved exoskeletons, and ancient footprints tell their stories. Their lives, magnified by oxygen, became a spectacle of biological potential, but even the strongest, the most adapted, cannot escape the inevitable flow of time, the dawn of the predator. In the rich shadows of the Carboniferous, not every form of life was content to bask in the sun. Beneath the towering fronds and within the murky shallows, new instincts began to stir the will to hunt, to strike, to consume. Insects that once ruled the skies now shared their world with hunters that crept, slithered, and watched, eyes glinting in the filtered green light. Among the forest litter, Arthropleura, the immense millipede that had once seemed unassailable, now found itself vulnerable. Fossilized trackways show these giants up to 2.6 meters long. their many legs moving in coordinated waves as they traversed the forest floor. But where once there had been safety in size, now there was exposure. Predators had begun to appear, equipped with jaws capable of piercing chitin and claws designed to grasp moving prey. Evidence from preserved trace fossils suggests encounters that ended in violence, crushed carapaces, disrupted trails, and bite impressions consistent with amphibian attacks. The world that had once rewarded stillness and armor was becoming one that demanded speed and awareness. The earliest amphibians, emerging from the swamp pools and river margins, became the new architects of danger. They were descendants of the lobe-finned fish that had first ventured onto land millions of years earlier. Their lungs, strengthened by oxygen-rich air, gave them the stamina to roam. Their limbs, fortified by bone and muscle, let them crawl through the dense undergrowth. Fossils such as Eogorinus and Crassigorinus reveal powerful tails for swimming and flexible spines for sudden ambushes. Some grew over 4 meters in length, their flattened skulls and recurved teeth adapted for grasping prey that strayed too near the water's edge. In the air, giant dragonflies like Meganeura still ruled, but even the sky was no longer safe. As amphibians lunged from pools and marshes, some insects became prey mid-flight, their wings torn and crumpled by a sudden leap. The fossil record of the Carboniferous preserves hints of these interactions, broken wings found near fossilized amphibian remains, the silent record of a struggle between air and earth. Each adaptation spurred another in response, driving life into a new era of complexity. The Carboniferous wetlands themselves shaped this evolutionary arms race. Dense vegetation restricted movement and sightlines, forcing predators to rely on stealth. Amphibians developed sensory organs that could detect vibrations through both air and water, precursors to the lateral line systems seen in modern species. Their eyes, placed atop flattened skulls, allowed them to watch the forest canopy while remaining submerged. Insects, in turn, refined their sensory abilities. Antennae capable of detecting chemical cues, compound eyes tuned to movement, and reflexes quick enough to evade an unseen strike. Each encounter between predator and prey rewrote the rules of life on land. Some of the most formidable arthropods of this era were not insects at all, but ancient arachnids and their relatives. Fossil scorpions, such as Pulmonoscorpius kirktonensis, reached lengths of over 70 centimeters, their stingers armed with potent venom capable of paralyzing smaller prey. Others, like early trigonotarbids, moved with deliberate precision through the forest debris, ambushing unsuspecting creatures in the twilight gloom. Predation had become an art as much as an instinct, sculpting bodies into forms that mirrored the evolving violence of the landscape. In the depths of ancient riverbeds, eurypterids, or sea scorpions, lingered relics of an earlier dominance now displaced by new terrestrial life. Though the largest species, like Jacolopterus, had vanished before the height of the Carboniferous, their smaller descendants persisted in the brackish shallows. They could crawl across wet sediment to chase amphibians or small arthropods, their specialized appendages adapted for both swimming and grappling. Their fossils, found in what were once estuarine environments, show how predators exploited every available niche in a rapidly changing world. The climate itself conspired to sharpen the teeth of evolution. As the Carboniferous progressed, cycles of flooding and drought reshaped the land. Swamps dried, rivers cut deeper channels, and oxygen levels began their slow decline. For amphibians, these fluctuations favored adaptability, the ability to survive both in water and on land. For the giant insects and arthropods, however, these changes marked the beginning of constraint. The air that once allowed them to breathe so easily was beginning to thin, and with it, their physiological advantages began to wane. Survival was no longer a matter of growth, but of endurance. In this crucible of competition, ecosystem hierarchies began to shift. The once dominant arthropods, though still immense, faced a growing population of agile predators capable of exploiting their weaknesses. Fossil assemblages from sites like Joggins and East Kirkton reveal a striking overlap of insect, amphibian, and arthropod remains evidence of coexistence and conflict. The diversity of both predators and prey increased dramatically, suggesting a complex and interdependent network of life. Despite the surge of predatory life, the pulse of fragility never left. The very richness of the Carboniferous forests, their vast deposits of vegetation, would one day become their undoing. As plant life buried carbon deep within the earth, atmospheric oxygen fluctuated, and ecosystems dependent on its abundance began to falter. What had been an age of excess was turning toward equilibrium, and equilibrium, in nature, is rarely kind to those built for extremes. Under the shadow of towering ferns, the Carboniferous became a theatre for the primal dance of pursuit and survival. Insects, arthropods, and amphibians wove their stories through predator and prey, through air and water, through shadow and light. Their fossils remain as fragments of motion, jaws frozen mid-bite, wings torn in flight, bones scattered along ancient streambeds. They speak of a world alive with tension, a symphony of hunger and adaptation echoing beneath the towering trees. And as the forests trembled with life and struggle, something unseen began to gather beyond the horizon, a quiet foretelling of the collapse to come, when even the fiercest would learn that no reign lasts forever. The flight to perfection. Having mastered the land, the predators now faced a new challenge, the vast expanse of the sky. Insects, once bound by earthbound limitations, began to take flight in search of a new realm to conquer. With wings that unfurled, like delicate sails in the wind, they embraced an entirely different mode of existence, their bodies honed for the art of flight. It was no longer merely about size or strength, it was about efficiency, maneuverability, and precision. For in the air, speed was the ultimate currency, and only the fittest could sustain the endless ballet between hunter and hunted. The wings of early insects like Meganeura, the giant dragonfly, were far more than just structures of flight. They were finely tuned instruments of power. Fossilized wings found in deposits across Europe and North America reveal intricate vein patterns that allowed the wings to fold and unfold with astonishing efficiency. These veins weren't just support systems. They distributed tension and force across the wing membrane, enabling the insects to maneuver with precision. The fossil record shows a remarkable adaptation in the veins themselves, structured in a way that maximized aerodynamic efficiency, allowing for greater control and faster turns in the air. Early insects could now navigate the dense, humid air of the Carboniferous, exploiting the layers of the ecosystem from above. Flight didn't evolve through size alone, nor by the mere addition of wings. It was a multifaceted process. The anatomy of flight was an art of balance. In the thoracic muscles, researchers have identified structural adaptations that enabled not just flight, but powerful, sustained flight. The flight muscles were vast, stretching across the thorax, attached to both wings. These muscles contracted rapidly, each beat a burst of energy, propelling these insects with surprising agility for their size. Fossil evidence shows well-developed ridges in the thorax of species like Meganeura, indicating specialized muscle attachments designed to generate power. This anatomical innovation, finely honed over millions of years, allowed these creatures to move with grace and strength, maneuvering in ways that were once thought impossible for such large insects. Speed and strength were secondary in the flight of these giants. What truly mattered was control. Insects, like Meganeura, could hover with astonishing accuracy, and execute tight turns in midair. This capacity was enabled by the highly flexible jointing of the thorax and wings, which worked in tandem to control pitch and yaw. Unlike modern insects that rely on a complex series of wing beats to generate lift, These early flyers could modulate each movement in real time, adjusting quickly to changes in wind currents or even the pursuit of prey. In the dense, swarming world of the Carboniferous, this ability to adapt mid-flight could be the difference between life and death. The success of flight was not confined to the skies, either. In the forest below, the rise of flying insects created new ecological niches, transforming the environment. As insects soared, they carried pollen between distant plants, becoming unwitting architects of the forest's botanical network. This mutualism between insects and plants opened the door to new forms of life and rapid evolution. The sky was no longer just a place of flight, it became a vital space for ecological interaction, as insects influenced the landscapes below and the growth of forests above. Soaring through the oxygen-saturated air, the giants of the Carboniferous were not immune to the threats that lurked below. Fossil evidence shows that the skies were not just inhabited by insects, but by the first vertebrate predators, early amphibians, whose hunting abilities were becoming increasingly sophisticated. As Meganeura and others glided through the air, these predators learned the art of ambush. Their long, powerful bodies and swift limbs allowed them to leap at incredible speeds, closing in on their airborne prey. And though these amphibians had not yet mastered flight, their tactics were no less effective. The once unchallenged dominion of flying insects was slowly being eroded by this new breed of hunter, one whose evolution was set to outpace the wings of the ancient giants. However, the aerial supremacy of insects didn't come without cost. The atmosphere itself began to shift. As oxygen levels fluctuated in response to changing climatic conditions, the very gas that had powered the wings of these giant insects became less abundant. The high metabolic rates that allowed for sustained flight now faced greater challenges. Fossilized traces of reduced insect sizes in late Carboniferous deposits suggest that the once towering species had to adapt rapidly to diminishing oxygen levels. The high-flying giants of the early Carboniferous would gradually give way to more efficient, smaller forms of flight. What had once been a world ruled by the giants now began to shift in scale and scope, as flight itself was tested by the pressures of an evolving ecosystem. The aerial world, once dominated by titans, began to shift. Though insects would continue to refine their flight techniques, growing smaller, faster, and more maneuverable, their dominance was soon challenged not only by predators on the ground, but by the changing chemistry of the air. The age of giant wings would slowly give way to an age where efficiency, rather than sheer size, would reign. Though these creatures shrank, the basic blueprint of insect flight, perfected through eons of evolution, would lay the groundwork for all future flight in the animal kingdom. From the giant dragonflies of the Carboniferous to the tiny hummingbirds of today, the principles of flight developed in this ancient world still echo across the ages. In the skies above, the battle between insect and predator continued, a dynamic as old as life itself. But as the giants soared, the landscape beneath them was about to change. The once unfathomable silence was pierced by a new force, one that would mark the end of an era, the oxygen paradox. In the thin film of atmosphere that wrapped the ancient Earth, the balance of gases became a silent architect of life's destiny. During the late Carboniferous, oxygen saturated the air to levels the planet would not see again, perhaps 35%, nearly half again what we breathe today. Every breath, every flicker of flame, every rustle of wings was shaped by this invisible abundance. What it offered was power, the capacity for insects to grow to sizes unmatched in any later age, their bodies swelling to monstrous scale beneath the humid canopy of the coal forests. Yet within that abundance lay a trap, one that evolution had not yet learned to avoid. Scientists can read this story not from myth, but from numbers and stone. In fossilized resin, in carbon isotopes preserved within ancient shales, the signatures of that oxygen-rich world remain. Researchers reconstruct those atmospheres through models of gas exchange, charcoal frequency, and the chemistry of iron-bearing rocks that once weathered beneath torrential carboniferous rains. The picture that emerges is one of supercharged life, but also of instability. The forests that created this oxygen were fragile ecosystems, their roots binding the swamps that fed them, their decay producing the very coal seams we mine today. With every fallen tree and buried trunk, carbon was drawn from the air. Oxygen left behind a process that inflated the atmosphere's breath until the planet itself seemed over-oxygenated. For the giant insects, this was paradise. Creatures like Meganeura monyi, with wingspans over 70 centimeters, and Arthropleura, a millipede stretching 2 meters in length, were not anomalies of mutation, but products of chemistry. Insects do not breathe with lungs. Their bodies draw air through spiracles that lead into a branching network of tubes, the tracheal system delivering oxygen directly to tissues through diffusion. In a world dense with oxygen, that diffusion worked effortlessly. Cells thrived, muscles expanded. Even the slowest pulse of air carried more than enough to feed enormous, energy-hungry bodies. The giants dominated, not because evolution favored excess, but because the air itself made such excess possible. Yet diffusion has limits written in the mathematics of distance and pressure. As oxygen levels rose beyond equilibrium, metabolism and body size swelled together until the two could no longer scale in harmony. The very mechanism that allowed insects to thrive became a liability when the environment began to change. Geological and biological feedback loops began to destabilize the carboniferous atmosphere. Vast forests died off in periods of drought and flood. Decay slowed as global conditions cooled, and oxygen, once abundant, began to fall. Insects, whose physiology depended on that abundance, faced a narrowing corridor of possibility. Their tracheal systems could not evolve fast enough to compensate for the thinning air. Gigantism became a burden, and the giants began to vanish. The fossil record bears witness to this decline with clinical precision. In strata spanning the Carboniferous Permian boundary, entomologists have catalogued a steady reduction in insect wing size and body mass. Where Meganeura once ruled the canopy, smaller dragonflies emerged, their wings lighter, their thoraxes more compact. The sprawling arthropods of the coal swamps retreated into history, replaced by leaner, faster, more efficient forms. It was not extinction by catastrophe, but attrition by chemistry, the quiet suffocation of a dynasty. The oxygen curve fell, and with it, the ceiling of size. Paleoclimatic models suggest that fire frequency, another indirect measure of atmospheric oxygen, dropped dramatically as levels declined. The earth that once burned easily, where every lightning strike could ignite a forest, became damp and resistant. Charcoal records thin across the geologic timeline, matching the retreat of the great insects. The link between combustion and respiration is more than poetic. Both depend on the same element. Both fade when oxygen falters. In the silence that followed the last carboniferous flames, the air became harder to breathe for those who had built their empires on its richness. But not all life suffered equally. The decline in oxygen created a selective pressure that favoured new anatomies, more efficient circulatory systems, and innovations in gas exchange. Early amphibians and reptiles, equipped with lungs, not tracheae, found themselves less constrained. Insects had once ruled the skies and swamps. Now vertebrates began to rise from the water's edge, inheriting the Earth's diminishing air with lungs capable of drawing meaning from scarcity. In this way, the fall of the insect giants became the prelude to another ascension, one defined not by size, but by endurance. Through the lens of biogeochemistry, the story becomes eerily symmetrical. The same oxygen surge that had once opened the door to gigantism had been built by plants, and it was the plants' decline that closed it again. The Carboniferous world was a living machine, cycling carbon and oxygen in fragile balance. When that machinery faltered, when the coal forests collapsed under climatic stress, the very atmosphere shifted. Life's design had to change with it. Evolution, always reactive, found its next path in efficiency, not magnitude. Today, those oxygen fluctuations are measured in parts per million, traced through bubbles in ice cores and the isotopic memory of ancient minerals. Yet their legacy endures in the architecture of every insect alive. Modern dragonflies, though tiny compared to their ancestors, retain the same breathing structures that once supported wings the length of an arm. Inside their thoraxes, microscopic tubes still carry air by diffusion, a relic of a time when the planet itself was more generous. Even in their fragility, they carry the memory of abundance. The fall of these giants was not tragedy so much as transformation, a correction written into the physics of life. In every evolutionary surge, there is an eventual reckoning, a return to balance. Oxygen, once the liberator, became the limiter. And in its withdrawal, a space was made for something new to emerge, not in the skies, but on the ground below, where creatures with lungs and limbs would soon rewrite the story of dominance once again. The great insects remain preserved in stone, their wing impressions fine as lace, their bodies flattened beneath the weight of time. They speak of a paradox older than memory, that life's triumphs are always conditional, its grandeur bound by invisible thresholds. What rises on the breath of abundance must one day learn to survive without it. And in that struggle, the slow narrowing of possibility, the earth itself begins to prepare for the next inheritors of air. The great extinction looms. The giants that had once ruled the forests now found themselves constrained not by predators or rivals, but by the very air they had relied on. The vast swarms of Meganeura and Arthropleura, once the undeniable kings of the ancient earth, began to dwindle, their once immense bodies succumbing to an invisible foe, the changing atmosphere. Oxygen, the very substance that had allowed them to soar to staggering heights, now slipped from their grasp, tightening its grip in ways they could not adapt to. What had been a perfect ecosystem, vibrant and unyielding, was fading, leaving behind only echoes of the great age that had once been. For all their grandeur, they had no defense against the natural forces reshaping the planet beneath them. As oxygen levels fell and the climate shifted toward increasingly arid conditions, the lush, vibrant landscapes of the Carboniferous began to fragment. Forests that had once stretched as far as the eye could see began to die back, giving way to more barren stretches of land. The swamps and marshes where giant arthropods once thrived dried up. Vegetation became sparse, unable to support the enormous organisms that had once flourished under the dense canopy of ferns and horsetails. The very air that had been a rich, life-giving force now became a limiting factor, and the once thriving insect populations found their environment slowly slipping away. The land was slowly turning inhospitable for the creatures that had once dominated it. The size that had once been their strength became their undoing. The giants' enormous bodies required immense amounts of oxygen to function, and as atmospheric levels fell, their tracheal systems, unable to adapt quickly enough to the changing conditions, began to fail. The inefficiencies of their oxygen uptake, once easily compensated for by the excess oxygen in the air, became fatal. Their massive bodies, once seen as marvels of nature, became cumbersome and unsustainable. They could no longer sustain their giant forms. With every passing generation, the vast populations of these megafauna dwindled, unable to replace themselves in a world that had changed too quickly. The sky, once dominated by their wings, began to empty, and their once thriving colonies fell silent. The reign of the giants was reaching its inevitable conclusion. The collapse of the great insect populations was not sudden, but rather a drawn-out, inexorable decline. The forests that once teemed with life grew quieter and more desolate. As plant life began to adapt to the changing atmosphere, the food sources that had once been abundant became scarce. The carbon-heavy soils that had once supported massive oxygen-producing trees began to become inhospitable. And in the absence of those trees and the creatures that relied on them, the great insect dynasties began to crumble. As oxygen levels fluctuated and the climate continued to shift, the entire web of life became increasingly fragile. In the fossilized layers of sediment, we find their last, fragile remains, giant wings, and bodies frozen in time, a silent testament to a world that no longer could sustain them. This extinction was not swift, but rather the product of a slow but relentless process of environmental transformation. In the end, it was not just the lack of oxygen that doomed the giants, but the breakdown of the entire ecosystem. Life, once so abundant and magnificent, faced an undeniable fragility. The carboniferous forests and swamps, rich with oxygen-producing plants, had become unstable. The climatic fluctuations that led to the decline of these once stable ecosystems shifted the balance in ways that no creature, no matter how mighty, could escape. The oxygen they had once breathed freely became scarce. The food they relied on became harder to find. The age of the giants was drawing to a close, and it was not a tragedy of violence or sudden disaster, but one of slow, creeping decline, a changing of the seasons, of the atmosphere itself. The great creatures of the past, whose wings once cast vast shadows over forests of fern, now found their reign slipping away in ways they could not fight. No creature is immune to the ebb and flow of Earth's cycles. Where once there had been abundance, only the remnants of a fading age remained, buried deep in sediment and fossilized remains. The cycle of life, which had allowed giant insects to flourish in the first place, had come full circle. And as their decline gathered pace, a new age was beginning to stir, one that would bring with it new creatures, capable of adapting to the ever-changing world. The Earth, as it always does, prepared to renew itself, slowly shifting the mantle of dominance from the old rulers to the new. In the fossil records, the giants of the Carboniferous are but a momentary glimpse into a world that no longer exists. Their legacy, however, is enduring. The remains of giant arthropods and insects provide a vivid picture of a lost epoch, of a time when the Earth was ruled not by vertebrates, but by creatures whose bodies were as large as their dominion. And though their reign ended, the lessons they leave behind are profound. That the forces of life and death, of adaptation and extinction, are often beyond our control, shaped by forces that move silently beneath the surface of time. As the great insects faded into history, the door to the next great era began to open. The changing climate, the decline in oxygen, and the collapse of ecosystems would soon lead to the rise of a new type of ruler. These new creatures, less reliant on the abundance of air and more capable of surviving in the shifting world, would soon claim the Earth for themselves. The age of the giants had passed, but the legacy of those incredible creatures would echo throughout history, leaving us with a sense of awe at the fragility and power of life itself. Their descendants remained, waiting for the rise of new rulers, ready to conquer the landscapes that had once been theirs. From giant to small, as the giants of the Carboniferous faded into history, the Earth did not fall silent. Where colossal wings had once churned humid skies and forests trembled beneath the weight of armored predators, the void was quickly filled by smaller forms, quieter, lighter, but endlessly persistent. In the wake of the collapse, evolution began its quiet reconstruction. Each new creature that emerged carried the inheritance of the fallen, strength distilled into efficiency, bulk traded for precision, and survival rewritten in miniature. The extinction of the largest arthropods was not an abrupt vanishing, but a gradual surrender. As oxygen levels dropped and the air grew thinner, the vast tracheal networks that once fueled giants could no longer deliver what their bodies required. The skies that once carried dragonflies the size of hawks now belonged to insects, scarcely the length of a finger, their wings lighter, their breathing systems refined. Where once mass had meant mastery, the new rule was restraint. Life's architects began to design for endurance rather than spectacle. Buried within sediments spanning the late Carboniferous to early Permian, fossils quietly mark the shift taking place. Layers that once held the impressions of meganeural wings now yield traces of smaller species, delicate outlines of Spilopteron, Syntenopterus, and early beetles that would come to dominate the next age. These fossils tell of a world reshaping itself in both form and function. Insects diversified into niches their ancestors had ignored, burrowing into bark, scavenging decaying matter, feeding on spores, pollen, and each other. A grand compression of scale took place. The forests no longer echoed with the thunder of wings, but with a new, subtler rhythm of survival. Smaller size brought more than just endurance. It unlocked versatility. Tiny bodies could hide, adapt, reproduce quickly, and occupy ecological spaces unreachable to larger creatures. Their respiration became more efficient relative to their mass, their reproductive cycles faster, and their mutations more frequent. In evolutionary terms, they became the planet's most agile experimenters. Every forest floor, every hollowed log, every stagnant pool became a laboratory of adaptation. The insect's future was written not in dominance, but in diversity. The changing environment accelerated their success. The collapse of the Carboniferous rainforests fractured ecosystems into isolated pockets, each one a crucible for new life. Insects that had once lived beneath vast canopies now encountered drier climates and open terrain. The first ancestors of modern grasshoppers and roaches began to emerge species capable of surviving in harsher, less stable environments. Their wings shortened, their bodies thickened, their diets broadened. In a sense, evolution was trading extravagance for practicality, beauty for resilience. Scientists studying these shifts often describe the late Carboniferous and early Permian as a time of miniaturization pressure. Atmospheric oxygen levels had fallen to nearly half their previous peak, forcing adaptations across the board. Metabolism, once fueled by abundance, now relied on efficiency. Insects began to evolve new spiracle arrangements and tracheal systems that minimized water loss and maximized oxygen intake. Their exoskeletons thinned, reducing the energetic cost of molting. These subtle, microscopic changes would prove as revolutionary as any mass extinction event, a quiet revolution that favored the small and the swift. Among the survivors, beetles began their long ascent. The earliest members of the order Coleoptera appeared during this turbulent transition, their hardened elytra protecting delicate wings beneath. This innovation, simple yet profound, allowed them to thrive in unstable environments. They could burrow into soil, shelter from heat, and colonize decaying vegetation where oxygen was sparse. With time, their numbers multiplied, laying the groundwork for one of the most successful lineages in the history of life. Today, 1 in every 4 animal species on Earth is a beetle, a statistic that traces its origins to this ancient evolutionary bottleneck. Meanwhile, new predatory adaptations arose in response to the decline of the giants. Where once dragonflies ruled the skies, smaller aerial hunters evolved, with faster wing beats and more acute vision. Early mantid-like insects began stalking prey with spined forelimbs, while ancestors of true bugs refined their piercing mouthparts for fluid feeding. The food web reassembled itself in miniature, each new role filled by creatures half the size but twice as efficient. Nature's economy had become leaner, its energy redirected from maintaining mass to refining method. The fall of the great forests also reshaped reproductive strategies. With habitats fragmented and resources scarce, insects developed eggs that could resist desiccation and larvae that grew rapidly in unpredictable conditions. The first metamorphic cycles took form larvae specialized for feeding, adults for dispersal. This division of labor within a single life cycle became one of evolution's most ingenious solutions, enabling insects to adapt to seasonal and environmental instability with unmatched flexibility. Even as the physical world grew harsher, the insect realm flourished in complexity. Fossilized wings show increasing diversity in venation patterns, evidence of experimentation with flight styles and energy use. In some species, wings grew shorter to conserve resources. In others, they lengthened and narrowed for endurance flight across expanding dry plains. Each adaptation marked a step away from the monumental scale of the Carboniferous and toward the intricate balance of the Permian biosphere. To look upon these fossils is to glimpse continuity in transformation. Though the age of the giants was ending, evolution had not withdrawn its creative hand, it had merely changed its brushstroke. The forests that once sheltered titans now nurtured survivors whose strength lay not in their size but in their adaptability. Their success was quiet, almost invisible at first, yet profound in consequence. For every fallen giant, 1,000 smaller lives took its place, each carrying forward the essence of resilience that defines life itself. In the end, the shrinking of the insect world was not a story of loss, but of renewal. What perished in grandeur returned in abundance. The air still shimmered with wings, though lighter now, and the soil still stirred with motion, though subtler in scale. The balance of life had not vanished, it had refined itself, finding strength in smallness and endurance in simplicity. As the giants faded into the fossil record, their legacy endured in every flutter, crawl, and hum of the creatures that replaced them, the quiet inheritors of Earth's oldest and most adaptable lineage. The insect legacy. From the stillness left in the giant's wake, life found its rhythm again, pulsing through fern and scale, through air and tide. The forests that once trembled beneath the weight of dragonfly wings now whispered with smaller lives, delicate, deliberate, resilient. From the ashes of enormity came refinement. The air no longer carried the sound of thunderous flight, yet in every hum and flicker of modern wings, the echoes of that vanished age persist. The story of the insects did not end with the loss of their titans. It changed form. What had been a world of dominance became one of endurance. Those that survived the Carboniferous collapse were not merely remnants of grandeur, but architects of what would follow. In their compact frames and efficient systems lies the memory of excess, a genetic archive of what it once meant to push the limits of air and bone. And through this inheritance, the insects wrote a new chapter of existence, one that continues even now in every field and forest of the modern world. Across deep time, evolution favors what endures, not what dazzles. The smaller descendants of the giants learn to live within new boundaries of oxygen and temperature. Their tracheal systems, once capable of fueling massive bodies, adapted to serve miniature ones with precision. The same branching networks of tubes, refined, compacted, perfected, became the engine of survival. The fossil record preserves this transformation in exquisite detail. Impressions of wings that mirror the venation of dragonflies today. Delicate mandibles, echoing designs that first appeared over 300 million years ago. In form and function, the line of descent is unbroken. In every wing beat today, the Carboniferous lives on. Dragonflies, the heirs of Meganeura, still patrol the skies, their compound eyes scanning with the same wide-angle precision that once guided the largest aerial hunters of the Paleozoic. Their wings, though smaller, bear the same intricate lattice of veins that once spanned 2 feet across. Entomologists studying these modern insects have traced the aerodynamic principles that allowed both ancient and modern species to hover, dive, and strike with near mathematical perfection. Flight, once born of abundance, survived through mastery of efficiency. Scattered across genomes and epochs alike, a handful of sequences still whisper the same command, to continue. The pathways that govern metamorphosis, the transformation from larva to adult, trace their roots to ancient epochs. Fossil larvae, preserved in Carboniferous shale, show the same segmented forms and developmental stages found in their living descendants. The ability to reinvent the body within a single lifetime was one of nature's most elegant solutions, allowing insects to occupy multiple ecological roles in a single generation. In this adaptation lies the essence of their legacy, versatility, not enormity, as the key to survival. Modern forests still carry the shadows of their ancestors. Ants, beetles, and termites move through soil and wood as their ancient relatives once did through decaying ferns and trunks of lepidodendron. Even their social structures, cooperation, division of labor, communication through scent can be traced to behaviors refined in the dense, humid ecosystems that once blanketed the Carboniferous world. The ecological blueprint forged among fallen trees and stagnant swamps remains fundamental to the balance of life today. Beyond anatomy and behavior, the giants left behind something deeper, a continuity of purpose. Insects were, and remain, the world's great recyclers, converting death back into fertility, decay into renewal. The colossal detritivores and predators of the Carboniferous established a rhythm of decomposition and rebirth that still underpins the biosphere. Without them, the very soil beneath our feet would not exist in its current richness. Every hum of a cicada, every flicker of a moth in summer light carries the unseen inheritance of that age. What once defined survival has become the foundation of diversity. In the aftermath of collapse, evolution does not mourn, it reimagines. The scaling down of life after the Carboniferous was not a retreat, but a recalibration, a quiet revolution that opened countless ecological niches for smaller, faster, more specialized forms. From this adaptive explosion arose the first true social insects, the flowering of beetle lineages, and the gradual dominance of species that would later accompany the rise of flowering plants. What the giants began in grandeur, their descendants perfected in subtlety. Written in fragments, the fossil record preserves the tale, a wing's faint imprint, a set of mandibles in amber, a tracheal line turned to mineral. Each fragment is a whisper from the deep past, revealing continuity across collapse. Scientists studying isotope ratios in fossilized tissues have uncovered clues to how atmospheric changes shaped metabolism and size, bridging the gap between the giant's demise and the resilient miniatures that replaced them. The insects, once sculpted by oxygen's generosity, learned to survive its withdrawal, and in doing so, they mastered the art of endurance itself. And even now, in the hum of summer air or the delicate shimmer of a dragonfly hovering above a pond, the legacy remains visible to those who look closely. The same mechanics that lifted the titans of the Carboniferous still power the smallest wings. The same instincts that guided their hunts still pulse in modern predators. Time has refined their form, but not their essence. The inheritance of deep time is not one of bones and fossils alone, but of continuity, a persistence of design that defies extinction. But history, as ever, moves forward. The dominance of insects, once absolute, would soon meet its match. From the swamps and shifting coastlines of the late Paleozoic, new challengers would rise, vertebrates that could move with speed, strength, and intelligence unknown to any creature before. The age of insects had written the prelude to a grander, more volatile drama. As their wings carried the echoes of ancient air, the ground beneath them was preparing for a new kind of ruler, one that would change the fate of life forever. A new world of small giants. With the giants gone, life did not retreat into shadow. It blossomed anew, vibrant and relentless. The world that rose from the ruins of extinction was no longer dominated by size, but by the quiet brilliance of adaptation. Beneath the leaves of the new forests, in the crack of every rock, and across every swaying grass, insects began to stake their claim once more. Their wings, now smaller but no less efficient, beat to the rhythm of a world that had begun to reorder itself. The air, still rich with oxygen, hummed with the promise of life's inexhaustible creativity. In the wake of catastrophe, nature quickly filled the void. The world that had once been ruled by enormous, lumbering creatures now vibrated with the lightness of smaller, quicker beings. What had been lost in mass was gained in agility. Insects, once the giants of their time, have now evolved not for grandeur, but for versatility. Their new forms were as varied as the niches they occupied, some gliding silently over ponds, others scurrying beneath the cover of leaves, while a new generation of hunters prowled the shadows. It was a world of specialization, each species finding its place with uncanny precision. The insects that survived the Great Extinction were not relics. They were the beginning of something new, a second, quieter age. Fossils from this time reveal a world teeming with life in miniature. Among the first of the new arrivals were beetles, ants, and early cockroaches, all of whom had found refuge in the fractured ecosystems that emerged. In these tiny forms, evolution's brushstrokes had become finer, more detailed. Fossilized beetle carapaces show incredible variation in shape and structure, evidence of rapid adaptation to different environments. Some beetles, for instance, developed larger mandibles for defense, while others evolved sleek, flattened bodies for burrowing into soil and leaves. This diversification marked a turning point. The insects, once constrained by their sheer size, now spread like threads across the tapestry of life, filling ecological roles that ranged from pollinators to decomposers to predators. With the size reduction came an explosion of forms and behaviors. Insects began to adapt not only to the changing environment, but also to one another. Where once size had granted dominance, now it was efficiency and resourcefulness that dictated survival. Insect bodies became leaner, better suited to flight, better equipped to find food in the newly shrinking ecosystems. The change was not simply physical, it was behavioral. Insects evolved different strategies for reproduction, feeding, and communication. Social insects like ants and termites developed complex social structures that allowed them to survive in colonies. Their cooperative behaviors allowed them to outlast many of the solitary species that had once ruled the skies and forests. These colonies, working as superorganisms, grew in number and influence, changing the ecological landscape on a scale that would become one of Earth's most remarkable success stories. The transition to smaller forms was not merely an aesthetic change, it was a vital adaptation that helped these species survive a world in flux. The Permian landscape, though more hospitable than before, was still vastly different from the lush, oxygen-rich world of the Carboniferous. The climate was cooler and drier, and the oxygen levels had stabilized but were far lower than they had been in the past. These shifts forced insects to adapt in ways that made them more resilient. The collapse of large forests had led to the expansion of open spaces and new habitats, from arid scrublands to wetlands. Small, adaptable creatures could thrive in these fragmented, unpredictable ecosystems. Genetic evidence suggests that the rapid diversification of insects during this period was not a random occurrence, but a natural response to the changing environment. As larger species faded away, they left gaps in ecosystems that smaller, more specialized forms could fill. Fossils from the early Permian show how insects adapted not just physically, but genetically, developing traits that allowed them to survive in new climates and exploit new resources. This diversification laid the groundwork for the immense variety of insect species we see today. The small size of these insects, often only a few millimeters long, became an asset, enabling them to exploit habitats that had been beyond the reach of their giant ancestors. By the time the early Permian had passed, insects had claimed their place as the dominant invertebrates on Earth. The forests that grew in the wake of the Carboniferous collapse were no longer the towering, fern-filled giants of the past. Instead, they were smaller, more fragmented, and less predictable. Insects adapted to these new conditions with astonishing speed. Ants, beetles, and flies began to fill ecological roles that allowed them to thrive in environments where larger animals could not. Insects had once been the ancients of their time, but now they had found new niches, new territories, and new ways to survive. Their diversity had become their greatest strength. But the insects were not alone. As the landscapes shifted, so did the animals that inhabited them. Amphibians, long the dominant predators, began to face competition from another emerging group, reptiles. These new animals, better suited to the changing environment, would soon rise to prominence. Though insects were well adapted to their new niches, the balance of power was about to shift again. The small giants of the insect world, once unchallenged in their domination, would soon face a new kind of force. For now, though, the world was theirs. The insects had found their place not through size, but through adaptability and specialization. Their ancestors, the colossal flyers and lumbering predators of the Carboniferous, had laid the foundation for the insect world of today. And though they had fallen, the legacy they left behind, a legacy of resilience and reinvention, would continue to shape the world for millions of years to come. While these smaller giants grew strong, the winds of change began to gather on the horizon. The insects world, once defined by giants, was about to face its greatest challenge yet, one that would see the rise of a new, more dominant breed of rulers. But for now, the insects had their moment in the sun. Their flight was no longer a spectacle of size, but a triumph of survival. And in this new, smaller world, they were the rulers, masters of adaptability, masters of the earth. From sky to earth, the end of the age of giants. In the quiet aftermath of the insect giants' reign, the world began to turn with a different rhythm. The mighty wings that once cast shadows over vast swamps and forests now lie still, leaving behind only faint echoes in the wind. What had been an era of colossal flight gave way to a world where smallness, agility, precision, and adaptation would define survival. Yet, even as the insect giants faded into the shadows of history, their legacy was far from gone. They had set in motion a series of ecological shifts that would shape the future of life on Earth for millions of years. What came next was not a retreat, but a transformation. The insects, once dominant in size, had laid the groundwork for a new kind of rule, one that would soon see the rise of an entirely different power. The reptilian revolution was on the horizon. As oxygen levels stabilized and the climate shifted toward drier conditions, reptiles, smaller, more efficient in their respiration, and better equipped for terrestrial life, began to dominate. The age of insects, though now passing, had quietly prepared the stage for these new creatures to emerge, filling the niches that had once belonged to the giants. The soil, once enriched by the decomposition of ancient plants and insects, would now nurture an entirely new generation of life, paving the way for the Mesozoic era. It was not only in size that the insects had influenced the next epoch, but in their ecological roles. Insects, even as they grew smaller, were never without purpose. They had long been the planet's recyclers, turning dead organic matter into rich soil, aerating the earth, and providing sustenance for countless species. As they disappeared from the skies, their legacy in the soil, rich, fertile, and alive with microorganisms, remained a foundation for the ecosystems that would rise in the aftermath. The plants that had once been pollinated by the immense flying insects would continue to thrive, but in their place, new pollinators would emerge. Insects may have lost their dominance in size, but their role in the Earth systems remained vital. New fossils show how the end of the insect giants was not a singular event, but part of a broader ecological reset. The late Permian fossil record paints a picture of a world in flux, with insects diversifying into a new set of niches, developing new traits, and establishing new roles in the ecosystem. The end of the age of giants didn't mark the end of insect influence. Rather, it marked a shift in their dominance. It was the insects' quiet, underground influence that would allow the next rulers of the earth to rise. Their decomposition of organic matter had contributed to the formation of fertile soil, essential for the plants that would sustain the coming generations of herbivores and, eventually, carnivores. The change was not confined to the ground alone. With the decline of giant insects and the rise of smaller, more specialized forms, a ripple effect took place in the atmosphere and the climate. The extinction of the larger, oxygen-hungry creatures allowed new forms of life to flourish, and as the plants, trees, and ferns began to regain their foothold in the changed world, the rise of new food chains became inevitable. Reptiles, having adapted to the changing atmosphere, took full advantage of the new ecological niches left open by the absence of insect giants. Their evolutionary path would lead them to dominance, filling the role of both predator and prey in a newly structured world. And so, the stage was set for the great reptilian dominance that would follow an era where the world would be ruled by creatures of massive size, intelligent movement, and, eventually, the ability to dominate the skies. The insects, in their decline, had unknowingly prepared the earth for these new rulers. Their flight had been a prelude to the flight of another kind of giant, one that would dominate the world with intelligence, speed, and strength. Yet, even as the insects faded, their mark on the earth would never be erased. They had shown the planet what was possible, pushing the boundaries of evolution to their furthest limits. Their giants were gone, but the systems they created, the roles they fulfilled, the soil they nurtured, the ecosystems they formed remained in place. As we look to the skies today, we see not the wings of the giants, but the silhouettes of their legacy. The dragonflies that still dart over ponds, the bees that pollinate the flowers, the ants that carve out paths through the soil, they are all part of an ancient tradition, an inheritance passed down through time. The insects, once the undisputed rulers of Earth, continue to shape the world beneath our feet, even as their giants have long since vanished. Their legacy has been written in the bones of the planet, not just as a chapter of size and grandeur, but as a testament to resilience, to adaptability, and to the quiet power of smallness. The world today may no longer carry the hum of giant wings, but that hum still resonates in the hum of a bee's flight or the rustling of a grasshopper through the field. The insect legacy lives on in the ecosystem, in the soil, and in every creature that depends on it. The giant age may have ended, but the insects continue to thrive in their own quiet, persistent way. And as new rulers of the earth, the dinosaurs began to carve their place into the world, the insects were already setting the stage for the next great shift in Earth's story. And so, as the dinosaurs began their reign and the planet evolved, the insects quietly remained a constant, their influence felt in every corner of the earth. They had set the stage for something much greater, and yet their age had not truly passed. In every leaf, every tree, and every corner of the earth, the imprint of the insect giants lives on. And in the years that followed, the world would see yet another revolution, as new rulers arose to write the next chapter of Earth's eternal story. In the silence of vanished forests, their shadows still linger, echoes of wings that once ruled the air and forests that breathed like living oceans. The age of giant insects reminds us that every world, no matter how alien, was once real and alive, driven by the same pulse that shapes life today. Their time has passed, yet their legacy endures in every hum, flutter, and shimmer of modern wings. The giants are gone, but their story remains written in the air itself. If you're into exploring Earth's forgotten worlds, subscribe for more journeys into deep time.